Howdy, howdy. My name's Jeff Rowe Brown, and I grew up on a farm in Benton County, Arkansas. My ancestors moved there in 1856, and I'm part of the sixth generation of Sharps that have been born and raised on that same plot of ground. Most of my grandfather's portion is gone now, buried underneath what has become Highway 612, the bypass around the north side of Springdale. During the construction process of that road, they effectively stripped off the highest field and filled the deepest valley with it, so that, should you travel that highway, once you've crossed Wagon Wheel Road, Spring Creek, and started heading up the hill on the west side, underneath you about 75 feet, buried underneath I don't know how many tons of Ozark red clay, there's a pile of rocks that I don't think anyone's ever going to see again, but I was part of the fourth generation of people to stack it there. In 1924, my great-grandfather added 40 acres to the west side of the farm, and he spent the latter part of the winter and the early spring plowing up the flat spots to put a crop in. He'd plow it and go through with a cart and put all the largest rocks in it, haul them to the bottom of the hill and toss them out and go up the hill and start again. Eventually they put the field in tomatoes, and when the crop came in, he and my great-grandmother, who was within weeks of having their first child and a hired man, spent days on end filling baskets with tomatoes and then putting the baskets in a cart for my great-grandfather to haul into Cave Springs where there was a cannery. They sold enough tomatoes that first year that they paid off the farm and bought a brand new Ford Model T. I don't know if they did tomatoes again the next year or any others or what other crops they might have planted or how often he replowed the field, but I do know that in the Ozarks you can harvest a crop of rocks every time you want to, and certainly it looks like he did it with some frequency because that pile of rocks got larger and larger every year. So that by the time I was a kid, I would help my grandfather when he'd plow. He'd get out his old Chevy farm truck and we'd put the driver's side tires in a furrow, and he himself would get out of the truck, and he and I would walk beside it as it drove itself, and we'd throw all the largest rocks we came across into it, drive down the hill, add to the pile, go back up, and start again. The other natural landmark that my great-grandfather was most responsible for comes in the shape of bodark trees. The old man loved the things, and he sowed the banks of Spring Creek with hedge apples or Osage oranges, whichever you like to call them. So when the trees reached maturity, their root systems, which grew in pretty tangled and gnarly, would keep the flood stages of the creek from washing the shores away. And he used the branches to make his fence posts. I haven't been around long enough to see, but I have heard that bodark lasts about 2 years longer than stone. And certainly when they sold the farm, all the fence posts that he set in 1925 were still up 80 years later. In fact, the only thing older than his fence post is his pile of rocks. And of all the things in the world that I never really thought that I would miss or hate that I don't get to see again, it's that pile of rocks deep in that valley, somewhere deep in the Ozarks.